The slap echoed through the opulent hall, but the shock wasn't from the hit. It was from the apron, dropped to the floor, and the deed she pulled from her pocket. The rent checks were in her name. This wasn't a disgraced chef. This was the landlord, and the stunned woman in the hanbok had just insulted the owner of everything in the room. Her name is Chef Elise Thorne, and for the last hour she prepared every course for the Kang family's anniversary gala, invisible in her whites. But this building, this business, this legacy, it's all hers. So how did a 34-year-old from Atlanta end up owning the most exclusive venue in Seoul? And why was her biggest investor's mother the last to know? To understand the shock on Madame Kang's face, you have to go back 2 years, to the first time she called Elise the help. 2 years ago, Elise Thorne arrived in Seoul with a duffel bag of knives, a James Beard nomination, and a broken heart. The heart was personal, the nomination was professional, the knives were for survival. She sold her share of a popular Atlanta eatery after her business partner and fiancé emptied their accounts. The press called it a chef's dramatic exit. Her grandmother, who'd mortgaged her house to fund Elise's first food truck, called it theft. So Elise took the last of her own savings, $12,000, and booked a one-way ticket. She wasn't running away. She was going where no one knew her previous story, where she could only be judged by the food on the plate. For 6 months, she staged at a famous asterisk Hanwoo beef barbecue spot in Gangnam, working for free, learning the rhythms of Korean high-end service. She slept in a asterisk Gashiwon, a single room the size of a walk-in closet. At night she practiced, not bulgogi but her own style, southern-inflected fine dining with Korean pantry staples, gochujang in the collard greens, doenjang whipped into sweet potato soufflé. Her goal wasn't to fuse, it was to converse. A culinary dialogue few were interested in hearing. She applied to 23 investors. 22 said no. The 23rd was Min-jun Kang. Min-jun was the scion of Kang and Park Holdings, a family firm with interests in semiconductors and commercial real estate. His passion project was food. He'd backed 3 trendy restaurants, all medium successes. He met Elise at a private tasting she catered for a friend. He ate her 5th attempt at kimchi cornbread. He finished the piece, sipped his water, and said, "This is the most arrogant food I've ever tasted." Elise, covered in flour, thought it was an insult. He continued, "You assume your grandmother's biscuits can have a conversation with my grandmother's kimchi. That's either foolish or brilliant. I hate foolish investments." He offered her a deal. He would fund a pop-up, a 3-month residency in a vacant space he owned in Itaewon. 70-30 split, his favor. If it gained a cult following, they'd talk about a permanent spot. It was a terrible deal. It was the only deal. The pop-up was called Thorn and Soil. It opened in November. The Korean food media ignored it, but a blogger from the New York Times, in town for a conference, wandered in. Her review called it a seismic quiet in Seoul's noisy scene. Lines formed around the block. Min-jun was pleased. He renegotiated the split to 60-40, still his favor. Elise worked 18-hour days, cooking, hosting, washing dishes. Min-jun brought his friends, his colleagues, his mother. Madame Kang Ji-young was a widow, the matriarch whose approval dictated family spending. She wore silk hanboks to dinner. She ate Elise's food with a measured silence. After the 3rd visit, she told Min-jun, "The black girl is talented, for a foreigner." It was the highest praise she gave. The pop-up's success triggered the next phase of Min-jun's plan. He wanted a flagship, not in Itaewon but in Cheongdam-dong, the epicenter of luxury. He showed Elise a property, a 3-story former art gallery with a courtyard. The rent was astronomical, the renovation budget more so. The new deal, a proper restaurant, Elise, with Min-jun as majority owner and Elise as the face and executive chef with a small equity slice. She would own 15%. It was standard, he said. For the industry, for Korea, for someone with no capital. Elise's lawyer, a friend from Atlanta on a video call, told her not to sign. She signed. She needed the kitchen. She told herself the percentage didn't matter. The food did. Construction began. Elise was at the site every day, covered in dust, arguing with contractors over hood ventilation and tile grout. Min-jun visited once a week, in a clean suit. One afternoon, while reviewing plumbing diagrams, Elise overheard 2 contractors talking. They weren't aware she spoke basic Korean. One pointed at the soaring ceiling and said, "A waste. This building has been a curse. The last 3 businesses failed. The owner is desperate to sell the whole thing, not just rent." The other laughed. "Then Kang is a fool for renting. He should buy it and become the landlord. That night Elise couldn't sleep. The word landlord stuck in her mind. She did something impulsive. She looked up the property listing. It wasn't just for rent. The contractor was right. The entire building, the gallery space, 2 upstairs offices, and the coveted courtyard was for sale. The price made her close her laptop. But a seed was planted. An insane, impossible seed. Break came from an unexpected place. A tech CEO from San Francisco, a regular at her Atlanta place, heard she was in Seoul. He booked the entire pop-up for a birthday party. After the meal, he pulled her aside. "I heard what happened with Mark," he said, referring to her ex. "It's trash. I'm launching a fund for founders who've been screwed over by bad partners. Mostly tech, but we have a cultural arm. It's a grant, not a loan, no equity." He slid a card across the table. "Apply. Talk about your food as intellectual property." She applied. She filmed a video of her making that kimchi cornbread, explaining the dialogue of flavors. She got the grant, $400,000. It wasn't enough to buy the Qingdam building, but it was enough for a down payment if a bank would give a mortgage to a black female chef with no Korean credit history, which they would not, unless the grant was seen as proof of serious backing, and unless she found a private lender willing to take a risk. She found one through a convoluted connection, a Vietnamese-American venture capitalist in Singapore who believed in disruptive cultural assets. The terms were brutal, the interest rate was high, but it was possible. The math, on a spreadsheet in her tiny room, showed a narrow path. She made her decision. She would not tell Min Jun. He was negotiating the rental contract for the restaurant space with the building's owner, an elderly man who lived in Jeju. Elise contacted that owner directly through a Korean-speaking lawyer she hired with grant money. Her offer: she would buy the entire building, not just rent a portion. She would then become Min Jun's landlord, not his tenant. Old man, tired of managing the property, agreed to sell to her for a lower price than listed, for a quicker all-cash close. The grant and the high-interest loan covered it. The entire process was conducted in secrecy, under a newly formed LLC with a meaningless name. Elise signed the final papers in a lawyer's office, her hands shaking. She owned a building in the most expensive neighborhood in Seoul, and her business partner, who thought he was building her a stage, had no idea the stage was now hers. The day after the sale closed, she had to meet Min Jun at the construction site. He was in a good mood. "The landlord accepted our rental terms," he said, smiling. "We got the keys." Elise took the physical key he offered, heavy and cold in her palm. It was a copy of a key to her own property. She felt a surge of vertigo. "That's great," she said, her voice steady. "When do we start?" The restaurant Elise opened 8 months later to rave reviews. Madame Kang held her 71st birthday party there. She complimented the sea urchin grits, then asked Elise to adjust the air conditioning. "It's blowing on my neck," she said, not looking up from her plate. Elise, in her chef's jacket, went to the thermostat. Min Jun watched, then pulled her aside. "You don't have to do that, I'll get a server." "It's fine," Elise said. "I don't mind." But she did mind. She minded the invisible line she kept crossing and recrossing. Owner 1 minute, service staff the next. The double life was a constant low hum of tension. And then Min Jun decided to book the entire restaurant for a private, ultra-exclusive gala to celebrate his mother's 72nd birthday. A 50-person dinner, media coverage, a traditional Korean performance. He would, of course, use the venue rent-free. "It's our flagship," he said. "It's the perfect showcase." He handed Elise the menu plan, written by his mother's personal assistant. It was a rigid, traditional Korean banquet course. There was no kimchi cornbread on it. No sea urchin grits. "My mother wants the classics for this one," Min Jun said, almost apologetic. "You'll execute it, though. It has to be perfect." Elise looked at the menu, then at the keys on her desk. One for the restaurant, one for the building's main entrance. Both were hers. She smiled. "Of course," she said, "it will be perfect." She spent the next week sourcing the finest ingredients, practicing the traditional dishes until they were impeccable. The night of the gala, she worked the pass, her kitchen a controlled storm. She could hear the chatter of VIPs, the clink of crystal. Madame Kang, resplendent in embroidered silk, held court. Everything was going according to Min Jun's plan. Until the third course, when Madame Kang summoned the chef. Elise walked into the dining hall, the smell of galbi and steamed abalone hanging in the air. She stood before the head table, her whites spotless. Madame Kang pointed a delicate finger at the *mulho*, a raw fish soup. "The broth is bland," she announced, her voice carrying. "It lacks depth. Go fix it." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Min Jun stared at his napkin. It was a public correction, a ritual humiliation to demonstrate control. The kind of move you pull on staff, not on a partner, not on an owner. Elise felt the weight of the deed in her mind, the years of struggle, the secret she'd carried like a stone. She looked at Madame Kang's expectant, dismissive face. She looked at Min Jun, who wouldn't meet her eye. And in that moment, the line she'd been balancing on simply vanished. She reached for the knot of her apron. The apron strings came loose with a soft whisper of fabric. She let the white canvas fall to the polished floor. It landed without a sound. The entire banquet hall held its breath. 50 of Seoul's elite watched as Chef Elise Thorne reached into the inner pocket of her jacket. She didn't pull out a notepad. She didn't pull out a pen. She pulled out a single, folded document. She opened it slowly, the rustle of paper absurdly loud in the silence. She placed it on the table next to the offending soup bowl, smoothing the crease with her palm. Min Jun was the first to move. He leaned forward, squinting at the Korean characters. His face, usually a mask of composed confidence, went blank. Then it cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally, a dawning, horrific understanding. It was a property deed, and the listed owner was not the old man from Jeju. It was Gardenia Holdings, LLC, and below that, as managing member, Elise Vivian Thorne. Madame Kang did not understand. Not yet. She saw her son's reaction. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice slicing the air. "A performance." Elise looked at her, then at Min Jun. "It's a title," Elise said, her voice calm, clear, and carrying to every corner. "For this building, I bought it 14 months ago. The landlord Min Jun negotiated with, that was my lawyer. The rent checks you've been paying for the restaurant, Elise, they've been going to an account I control." She turned her gaze fully to Madame Kang. "So when you say the broth is bland, you're criticizing the food prepared in your landlord's kitchen, in your landlord's building." The silence shattered. A gasp went up, chairs scraped, phones were subtly raised. Madame Kang's hand, which had been pointing, slowly lowered to the table. Her knuckles were white. She looked at her son. "Min Junna," she said, the suffix a command for explanation. Min Jun stood up. "Elise," he said, his voice low, strained, "what have you done?" "I ensured my seat at the table," she replied. "You only ever offered me a folding chair in the corner. This was the only way to get the main one." The scene fractured into a dozen whispered crises. Guests murmured behind hands. Business partners stared at Min Jun with new, calculating eyes. A socialite dropped her spoon into her bowl with a clatter. In the center of it all stood Elise, in her chef's jacket, but without the apron, the deed on the table between them like a declared war. Min Jun moved first. He walked around the table, took Elise firmly by the elbow and guided her, not gently, toward the kitchen's swinging door. His grip was tight. She didn't resist. The door swung shut behind them, cutting off the noise, plunging them into the stainless steel calm of the kitchen. The line cooks had stopped working. They stood frozen, staring. Min Jun didn't even see them. "Out," he barked. They fled. He released her arm. "Are you insane?" The words were a hissed whisper. "You humiliate me. You humiliate my mother in front of everyone." "She humiliated me first," Elise said, rubbing her elbow. "In front of the same everyone, you just sat there. That's how it works. That's her, you take it, you fix the soup, you move on. You don't declare property ownership at a birthday gala." "Why not?" Elise asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. "It's my property. Should I have sent a formal letter tomorrow? 'Dear tenant, please note your landlord is the chef. Sincerely, Elise.'" This seemed more efficient. Min Jun paced, running a hand through his hair. "This is a betrayal. Our partnership is a 70-85 to 15 split where you make all the decisions," Elise finished. "Where I cook the food that wins the awards, but you own the brand. Where I'm the talent you manage. I didn't betray the partnership, Min Jun. I outgrew it. I built a parallel one with myself." He stopped packing, looked at her with something akin to disgust. "You used my name, my connections, to get the grant, didn't you? That Silicon Valley fool, you name-dropped me. I said I had a prominent Korean investor. That was true. I didn't say you approved. You didn't need to. My work stood on its own. And the loan, the private lender, who would take that risk on you without my family's shadow behind you? Elise smiled, a thin, sharp thing. Someone who saw the shadow as a problem, not a benefit. Someone who wanted a piece of soul that wasn't already stamped Kang. You're not the only game in town, Minjun. You just act like you are. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The foundation of his world, his influence, his unassailable position had just developed a crack, and Elise was standing in it. The restaurant, he said, switching tactics. The lease. You've been my landlord this whole time. That's a conflict of interest. The contract could be void. Read the fine print, Elise said, walking to counter and pouring herself a glass of water. Her hand was steady. My lawyer was very thorough. There's a clause allowing for ownership transfer to a related corporate entity. Gardenia Holdings is the related entity. It's all legal, airtight. You can try to sue, it'll be expensive, and the press will love it. Sue's chef he thought was his employee over secret building buy. I've lived through scandal before, have you? The question hung in the steam-filled air. Minjun Kang had never been the subject of a scandal. He was the subject of flattering profiles. This was different. This was a story about being outmaneuvered. Outside, the party was imploding. Guests were making hurried excuses. Madame Kang remained at the head table, statue, still, her assistant whispering frantically in her ear. The perfect gala was now a viral incident waiting to happen. Minjun's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Word was leaking. Group chats were exploding. He looked at the screen, then back at Elise, a new coldness settling in his eyes. The initial shock was hardening into strategy. You think you've won, he said. You own a building, congratulations, but you need tenants. You need a reputation. You need this restaurant to succeed, and I can make it very, very hard for you to get either. Are you threatening to sabotage your own investment? Elise asked. The restaurant you own 78.5% of. I'm pointing out reality, he said. This isn't America, this is Seoul. My mother's friends are on the tourism board, in the food critic circles, in the licensing departments. You have a building, we have a system. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The rent is due on the 1st. I'll have my accountant send the check to your new LLC. I expect a proper invoice. He pushed through the doors back into the silent, ruined dining room. Elise was alone in the kitchen. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a hollow, shaking feeling in its wake. She leaned against the cold metal of the pass. She had done it, and she had no idea what happened next. The next morning, Elise arrived at the building at 6 a.m. as usual. The cleanup crew had worked through the night. The banquet hall was spotless, empty, haunting. There was no evidence of the explosion except a faint tension in the air. Her sous chef, Jae-hoon, a young Korean man who had believed in her vision from the pop-up days, was already prepping for the day's lunch service. He didn't look at her when she entered. Jae-hoon, she said. He kept chopping scallions, his knife moving fast. Chef. We need to talk about the menu. Do we? He said, finally stopping. He put the knife down. What should we talk about? The food, or the fact that you lied to everyone, to him, to us? I didn't lie, I omitted. In Korea, for people who work for you, that is the same thing. He took a deep breath. The line cooks are scared. They think Kang will close the restaurant. They think they'll lose their jobs. They think you played a game and they're the pieces. Elise felt the first true stab of fear. Her staff. She had been so focused on her fight with Minjun and his mother, she hadn't considered her team. The restaurant isn't closing, she said, her voice firm. I own the building. That makes us more secure, not less. It makes you a target, Jae-hoon said softly, and when the giants fight, the ants get crushed. He picked up his knife again. I will prep for lunch, but you should know 2 dishwashers already called in sick. They won't be back. By 10 a.m., the first public ripple hit. A popular Seoul lifestyle influencer, a guest at the gala, posted a cryptic but unmistakable story. A photo of the beautiful banquet table, followed by a gif of a sinking ship, with the caption, when the help owns the house, shocked doesn't begin to cover it. Kosou Sukendu, in Seoul scandal it didn't name names, but the foodie world was small. The whispers became a roar. By noon, Elise's phone started ringing. First, a reporter from the Asterisk Korea Herald Asterisk food section, a woman who had given Elise a glowing review. Her tone was no longer friendly. Chef Thorne, we're hearing some incredible stories about last night. Can you confirm you secretly purchased the Cheongdam-dong building and revealed it during Madame Kang's birthday. Elise, following her lawyer's urgent texted advice, said, "I have no comment at this time." She hung up. The phone rang again and again. The second ripple was more dangerous. An email arrived from the office of Minjun's lawyer. It was formal, cold. It acknowledged the change in ownership per the deed and requested a full certified audit of all building-related expenses for the past 14 months to ensure the rent payments had been correctly calculated and applied. It was a bureaucratic torpedo designed to consume her time, money, and mental energy, the first move in his promised campaign to make things hard. The third ripple was the quietest and the most painful. A regular customer, an older Korean art collector who loved her sea urchin grits, called to cancel his standing Friday night reservation for 4. "Not because of the food, chef," he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "The food is sublime, but my wife, she plays golf with Ji-young Kang. You understand, it's uncomfortable." Elise understood. She was becoming socially radioactive. In a city and an industry built on relationships and face, she had caused a powerful woman to lose face spectacularly. The debt would be collected, not in court, but in quiet cancellations, in lost referrals, in sudden difficulties. That evening service was a ghost of itself. The dining room, usually buzzing with a wait list by 7 p.m., was half full. The customers who did come seemed to stare, to whisper. The food, Elise knew, was perfect, but the atmosphere was poisoned. She stood at the pass, feeling the hollow silence where noise should be. After close, as she was reviewing receipts, the building's intercom buzzed. It was the security desk in the lobby. "Madame Kang is here to see you, chef," the guard said, his voice nervous. "She insists." Elise's heart hammered against her ribs. She had expected many things: more lawyers, angry calls from Minjun, bad press. She had not expected the matriarch herself to descend. "Send her up," Elise said, her mouth dry. She waited in the restaurant's empty dining room, the chairs upturned on tables. Madame Kang arrived alone, without her assistant. She had changed from the opulent hanbok into a severe, elegant black dress. She looked older and harder. She didn't sit. "You think this is a victory?" she began, dispensing with any greeting. Her voice was like stones rubbing together. "A foreigner outsmarting the Korean sun, a story you will tell back in America." "This is my home now," Elise said. "A home you stole. I bought it fairly, with money I earned." Madame Kang's eyes swept the room, her expression one of profound distaste. "This place was failing. My son saw potential. He gave you his name, his resources. He gave you asterisk value asterisk. And you repay him with public shame. You did not just buy a building, girl. You bought a war, and you have no army." Elise crossed her arms. "I have a deed. I have a legal right." "Legal?" Madame Kang spat the word. "This is not about law. This is about order. You broke the order. There is a price. My son will not pay the next quarter's rent. Challenge him. See how long it takes in housing court. See how the reporters write about the greedy foreign landlord suing her Korean partner. We will find every flaw, every code violation in this old building. We will send inspectors every week. Your customers will eat to the sound of drilling and official complaints. Your grantor will read about your management troubles. Your high-interest lender will get nervous." She took a step closer. "You have the paper, but we have the country. You will sell the building back to us, at a loss, and you will leave Seoul. That is the only way this ends." It was a devastating, comprehensive plan, not a frontal assault, but a siege, a death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Elise felt the walls of her beautiful building close in. She had the asset, but Madame Kang was right. She lacked the ecosystem to protect it. "Why are you telling me this?" Elise asked, forcing her voice not to shake. "Why give me the playbook?" "So you know it is inevitable," Madame Kang said. "So you save us all time and drama. You are a good chef. Be a chef somewhere else. This," she gestured around the dark restaurant, "is not for you." She turned and left, her heels clicking a final, disapproving rhythm on the marble floor. Elise stood alone in the dark. The initial high of the reveal had completely evaporated. She was left with the cold, hard consequences. She owned a castle, but the army was at the gates, and they knew every secret passage. She needed an ally, she needed leverage, and as she locked up, a memory surfaced. The contractors talking about the building being a curse, the old owner from Jeju so eager to sell. There was a story there, a story she had been too busy, too focused on her own survival to ask about. The next day, instead of fighting the first wave of bad press, Elise went to the district's public records office. She spent hours looking up the history of her building, permits, old business licenses, transfer documents. She found the trail of failed businesses, a gallery, a high-end tailor, a private club, all lasted less than 2 years. The common thread wasn't location or market. It was in the notes of a zoning dispute from a decade ago. A neighbor, a powerful, older family, had consistently opposed late-night licenses, signage permits, even delivery truck access times for every tenant. They made operating a nightmare. That family's name was Park, as in Kang and Park Holdings. Minjun's mother's maiden name was Park, Jeong Park Kang. Elise sat back in the dusty records room, the pieces slotting together with a cold, metallic click. The building wasn't a curse, it was a target. The Park family, for reasons buried in some old family feud or property grievance, had been systematically strangling any business that opened there. The old man sold to her because she was an outsider, unaware of the silent war. Minjun didn't want to buy it because he knew. He wanted to rent it, to use it, but owning it would mean inheriting the family conflict. He set her up in a battlefield without telling her there was a war. He didn't just underestimate her, he sacrificed her to a fight she didn't know existed. And his mother, Jeong, wasn't just defending her son's pride. She was protecting a decades-old family campaign. Elise's revelation hadn't just embarrassed them. It had handed the contested asset to an unpredictable outsider, blowing up their long, quiet strategy. She wasn't just in a business dispute. She was standing on the fault line of a generational grudge. And for the first time since the apron hit the floor, Elise felt a new emotion cut through the fear, a blazing, focused rage. They hadn't just looked down on her. They had used her as a pawn, and pawns, she decided, could sometimes topple kings. But to do that, she needed to find the original source of the grudge. She needed to find why the Park family hated this building so much. And that search would lead her to a secret buried deeper than property deeds. A secret that would turn her fight for a building into a fight that could shatter a dynasty. The records room gave her a name, but no story. For that, Elise needed a person. She found one in the back booth of a decades-old asterisk Suljip in a non-tourist part of Seoul, nursing a bottle of soju at 2 in the afternoon. His name was Mr. Bae. He was 79, a retired city planner who had overseen the Cheongdam-dong district for 30 years. He was also, according to a friendly clerk at the records office, who took pity on Elise, a man who held grudges longer than he held his job. Elise approached him with a bottle of the expensive soju she couldn't afford. He eyed her, then the bottle, and gestured for her to sit. She explained in her halting Korean that she was the new owner of the old gallery building. His eyes, clouded with age and alcohol, sharpened. "That building," he grunted, "the Park family's thorn." "Why?" Elise asked, pouring him a drink. "What did it do to them?" He took the glass, swallowed it in one gulp. "It didn't do anything. It's a building. It's what it stands on, and what was taken to build it." He told her a story that the official records had carefully omitted. In the early 1970s, the land her building occupied was not a single lot. It was two, one owned by a family named Park, Jeong's grandfather, the other, a smaller strip to the south, owned by a man named Choi, a tailor. The Parks wanted to build a large commercial property, but needed the Choi land to have the proper frontage and depth. Old Man Park offered to buy. Choi refused. His father had opened the tailor shop there after the war. It was his legacy. So Park used connections. He had the city rezone the Choi property, designating it as a necessary public thoroughfare, a paper street that would never be built. With that designation, Choi could not get permits to repair his agging shop. The building decayed. The city condemned it. And in a forced sale, Park acquired the land for a fraction of its value. The tailor shop was demolished. Old Man Choi hanged himself from a beam in his home 2 weeks later. The Park family built their building a year after that, and it had been a point of quiet shame and legal vulnerability ever since. Old Taylor had a son, Mr. Bae said, refilling his own glass. He was a boy, he saw everything, the harassment, the condemnation, his father's death. He grew up, became a lawyer, a very good, very angry lawyer. Every time the Park family or anyone they sold to tried to do anything with that building, he was there, filing appeals, challenging permits, tying everything up in courts. He didn't want money. He wanted the building to fail. He wanted the land to be a curse on them forever. And for 40 years, he succeeded. Elise's mind raced. Where is this lawyer now? Mr. Bay shrugged. Retired, I think, or dead. The attacks stopped, 7, 8 years ago. I assumed he passed or gave up. He squinted at her. But you say the problems started again for the last tenant. Elise nodded, the chill returning. The quiet lawyer's campaign had stopped because the lawyer was gone. But the problems for the last tenant, the one before her, had been recent. That meant the harassment hadn't been the work of the vengeful son. It had been the Park family themselves, continuing the fight against their own property. But why? To keep up appearances, to maintain the curse narrative. She thanked Mr. Bay and left. The story was tragic, but it was old history, a sad tale of corruption and suicide. It was leverage, but shaky emotional leverage. Then she remembered the part about the forced sale and the original zoning. A paper street that was never built. If the original land seizure was illegal, the title could be contested. Not by her, but by the Choi heir, if he was still alive. She went back to the records. She found the name of the tailor, Choi Di-hyun. She found the death certificate. And then, with the help of a private investigator she hired with the last of her grant money, she found the son, Choi Min-ho. He was alive. He was 68, and he was not a retired lawyer. He was a professor emeritus of constitutional law at Seoul National University, a renowned, respected legal scholar. And he had, according to the investigator, never once, in any public filing, lawsuit, or article, mentioned the land dispute or his father's death. He had buried it, along with his father. Elise now faced a choice. She could approach Professor Choi, reopen a wound 50 years old, and ask him to fight a legal battle to reclaim land that was now under a multi-million-dollar building she owned. She would be asking him to sue her asterisk. Or she could use the threat of this story against the Park family, but the story was only powerful if the Choi family was willing to fight. And if they weren't, it was just a sad anecdote. Meanwhile, the siege Madame Kang promised began in earnest. A city inspector arrived, citing a complaint about the restaurant's grease trap ventilation. The system was, in fact, state-of-the-art, but the inspection took 3 hours during lunch prep. Another inspector came the next day about the fire suppression system in the building's lobby, then a third about the disability access ramp in the courtyard. Each visit was a disruption. Each required her or her manager to be present. Reservations dwindled further. Minjun's rent for the restaurant did not arrive on the 1st of the month. Her lawyer sent a formal demand. His lawyer replied with a thick packet alleging breach of contract and mismanagement, demanding the audit again. It was a stalling tactic, but an effective one. The worst blow came from her staff. Jae-hoon, her sous chef, gave his notice. He was offered a head chef position at a new hotel restaurant. The offer, he admitted, had come through a connection of Madame Kang. It was a clear message: abandon Elise, and you will be rewarded. 3 more line cooks left with him. The soul of her kitchen was being carved out. Elise stood in her half-empty kitchen one night, the silence pressing in. She scrolled through the comments on a gossip blog that had finally named names. She should go back to where she came from. Who does she think she is? This is why you don't do business with foreigners. The words were like little pins. She thought of her grandmother, who had faced worse, who had built a life with her hands and her grit. She called her baby, her grandmother said, her voice crackling over the thousands of miles. You bought a building. I taught you to make biscuits, not real estate empires. Elise laughed, and it turned into a sob. She told her everything. The gala, the deed, the siege, the old story of the tailor. Her grandmother was silent for a long time. So you're in a war with a ghost and a giant, she finally said, and you're standing on the ghost's grave. That's a precarious place to stand, Elise. What do I do? You find out what the ghost wants, and you find out what the giant is most afraid of. Usually it's the same thing. Her grandmother paused. And you make sure you're not fighting for the building. You're fighting for the right to stand there. There's a difference. One is about stone, the other is about your bones. The next day, Elise went to Seoul National University. She didn't have an appointment. She waited outside Professor Choi Min-ho's office until he emerged, a slight, tidy man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. When she introduced herself as the owner of the Cheongdam-dong Gallery building, the kindness vanished. The firmness remained. "I have nothing to say to you," he said, moving to walk past her. "I know what happened to your father," Elise said, keeping her voice low. "I know about the paper street, the forced sale." He stopped. He didn't turn around. "That is a private matter, an old tragedy. It has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," she said, "because the Park family is trying to take the building from me. They're using the same tactics, bureaucratic strangulation, and I think they're doing it because they're afraid, not of me, of you, of that old tragedy coming back to life." Now he turned. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were volcanoes. "You are mistaken. They are not afraid of me. I made my peace long ago." "Did you?" Elise challenged gently. "Or did you just bury it? Because according to city records, the harassment on that property stopped 8 years ago, about the time you retired from active legal practice. They thought the fight was over, but the moment I, an outsider, bought the building, they started again. They're not just protecting an asset, Professor, they're protecting a secret, and I think you know what it is." Choi Min-ho studied her for a long, long minute. He saw her chef's jacket under her coat. He saw the exhaustion and defiance in her face. He sighed, a sound of immense weight. "Come inside." In his office, surrounded by books, he told her the rest of the story. The part Mr. Bay didn't know: the forced sale was indeed illegal. The zoning change was fraudulent. His father had gathered evidence, written threats from Park, bribes to officials, the original plans for the non-existent street. He had hidden it in a metal box beneath the floorboards of the tailor shop the night before the demolition crew came. He told his son where it was. But by the time young Min-ho was old enough and brave enough to dig, the new building's foundation had been poured. The evidence was entombed under 6 feet of concrete and steel. "Without that box, it was my word against a powerful family," Professor Choi said. "I became a lawyer to fight them, but I learned that the law is a tool and their tools were bigger. So I fought them the only way I could. I made that building a monument to their guilt. Every failed business was a reminder, but it was a cold revenge. It didn't bring my father back, and it drained me. When I retired, I stopped. I was tired of haunting them." Elise leaned forward. "The evidence, the metal box, you're sure it's under the building?" "It was under the back room of the tailor shop, which would be under what is there now." Elise pictured her building's blueprint. The tailor shop's lot was now part of the building's foundation, but also extended beneath the small courtyard garden. The courtyard was paved with flagstones. "The courtyard," she said. "It's under the courtyard." A wild, impossible hope flickered in Choi's eyes for a second, then died. "Even if it is, you cannot dig up a courtyard in Central Seoul. The permits, the disruption, the Park family would never allow it. They would get an injunction before your shovel hit dirt." Elise's mind was already racing, connecting dots. The Park family's renewed harassment wasn't just about pride or saving face. It was about active containment. They weren't just trying to get the building back. They were trying to get her asterisk out before she somehow, accidentally, discovered what was buried. Their fear wasn't of the past being known, it was of the past being physically unearthed. "What if," Elise said slowly, "we didn't need to dig? What if we could make them think we found it? What if the threat of that box being opened was enough to make them back off?" Professor Choi shook his head. "A bluff with no cards, they would call it. Not if the bluff came from someone they couldn't control, not if it went public." Elise stood up, the plan forming, terrifying and clear. "You're a respected scholar. I'm a chef with a viral scandal. What if we told the story, not in a court, in the court of public opinion? We tell the story of Choi Di-hyun, the tailor. We don't claim to have the evidence. We just say we're looking for it. We announce an archaeological survey of the courtyard to honor the history of the land. The Parks would have to publicly oppose it, revealing their panic, or they would have to allow it and live in fear of what we might find. Either way, the shadow of that box becomes real again." He looked at her, a mix of awe and pity. "You would burn your own reputation to the ground for this." "My reputation is already on fire," Elise said. "I might as well use the light to see what's buried." Professor Choi was silent for a full minute, weighing a lifetime of grief and anger against the calm he had forged. Finally, he nodded. My father deserved to have his story told, not as a weapon, as a truth. If you are willing to stand and tell it, I will stand with you. Elise left his office with an ally and a nuclear option. But when she returned to her restaurant, a new crisis was waiting. Taped to the front door was an official notice from the Seoul Metropolitan Government. A complaint had been filed regarding the cultural appropriateness and safety of her menu items, specifically the unauthorized fusion of traditional Korean ingredients. It was nonsense, but it triggered an automatic review by the Food Safety and Culture Board. Her restaurant was temporarily suspended from serving anything not on a pre-approved, traditional Korean menu. Her sea urchin grits, her kimchi cornbread, her doenjang sweet potato soufflé, her entire culinary identity was banned in her own kitchen. This was Madame Kang's masterstroke. She wasn't just attacking Elise's business or building, she was attacking her art, her voice. She was erasing her from the inside out. Elise tore the notice off the door. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear, with a cold, crystalline fury. They had gone too far. They had touched the food. She called Professor Choi. We're not bluffing, she said, her voice steady. We're going to dig, and we're going to do it tomorrow. The permits. We're not asking for permits. We're holding a public memorial for Choi Di-hyun. In the courtyard, we'll have a small ceremony, and we'll plant a tree. To do that, we need to break ground, just a little, enough for a news camera to see soil being turned in the exact spot. They'll have to physically stop us, and when they do, the world will see why. It was a huge risk. It could be seen as vandalism, as a publicity stunt. It could get her arrested, but it was the only move left that was hers. She called every reporter who had ever contacted her. She sent a press release, Chef Elise Thorne and Professor Choi Min-ho to honor forgotten history of Cheongdam-dong land. She didn't mention the parks. She didn't have to. The name Choi would be enough for anyone who knew the old story. The next morning at 10 a.m., Elise stood in the courtyard of her building. Professor Choi stood beside her. A handful of reporters and curious onlookers gathered, held back by a velvet rope. Elise held a small ceremonial shovel. She spoke briefly about honoring the past, about the souls of places. Professor Choi, his voice thick, spoke about his father, the tailor, a man who loved his land and his craft. Then Elise knelt. She positioned the shovel on a specific flagstone in the corner of the courtyard, the spot Choi had marked from his father's descriptions. The cameras clicked and whirred. She pushed down on the shovel. It scraped against stone. And that's when the courtyard doors burst open. Min Kang strode in, flanked by two uniformed security guards he'd hired for the building. His face was a storm. "Stop this immediately," he commanded. "This is private property. You are damaging the asset." Elise looked up, the shovel still in her hands. "It's my property, Min. I can plant a tree if I want to." "You are not planting a tree. You are staging a spectacle. This is a disgrace." He moved forward as if to grab the shovel. The cameras ate it up. "Why are you so afraid of a tree, Min?" Elise asked loudly for the microphones. "Is it because of what might be buried under it? Is it because your grandfather stole this land from Professor Choi's father?" The blood drained from Min-jun's face. He hadn't expected her to say it outright. Not here, not now. The public narrative had just shifted from a chef's feud to a historic injustice. He was no longer the wronged business partner. He was the heir to a corrupt legacy, trying to silence a victim's son. "That's a lie," he spat, but his voice lacked its usual force. "Is it?" Professor Choi stepped forward, a frail man suddenly seeming 10 feet tall. "Then let her dig. Let us see what lies beneath this stone. If you are confident in your family's history, you have nothing to fear." Min was trapped. If he let them dig, they might find the box. If he stopped them by force on camera, he confirmed their story. He stood there, paralyzed, as the cameras captured his silent panic. It was the image that would lead the evening news. But the person who emerged from the doorway behind him was not paralyzed. Madame Kang walked into the courtyard, back straight, face impassive. She ignored the cameras, ignored her son. She walked directly to Elise and looked down at the shovel. You win, she said, so quietly only Elise could hear. What? Elise whispered back, stunned. You will put the shovel down, you will send these people away, you will never speak of this again, and in return my son will pay all back rent with interest, the harassment will stop, the restaurant suspension will be lifted, you will have a new fair partnership agreement, you will keep the building. Her eyes were black, dead pools. This is the offer, take it now, or we will destroy you in ways you cannot imagine, not with inspectors, with lawyers who will tie you up for the rest of your life. We will bury you in litigation until you are a skeleton. This is your last chance to walk away with something. It was a ceasefire, a surrender even, but it came with a gag order on the truth. Elise looked at Professor Choi, who was watching them, hope and anxiety warring on his face. She looked at the cameras, at the story that was finally being told. She looked at the shovel in her hand, the symbol of digging up the past. Madame Kang had just revealed her deepest fear. It wasn't losing the building, it was the box, the truth. And in doing so, she had given Elise the one thing she needed more than a building or a restaurant, undeniable, ironclad leverage. Elise smiled, a small, weary smile. She pulled the shovel from the flagstone. She handed it to Min Jun. No, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't think I'll stop. I think we're just getting started. The video of Min Jun's paralyzed panic and Madame Kang's whispered negotiation hit the news that evening. But it wasn't the clip of Elise with the shovel that went viral. It was the 3-second close-up of Madame Kang's eyes as she said, "You win." It was the look of a dynasty realizing its foundation was rotten. The court of public opinion, once leaning against the foreign chef, turned overnight. The story was no longer about a rude dinner party. It was about a 50-year-old secret, a dead tailor, and a box of evidence buried beneath a billionaire's building. The Kang family's lawyers went into overdrive, but they were fighting a narrative firestorm. Reporters dug up the old zoning records. The story of Choi Di-hyun ran in major papers. Professor Choi, with Elise by his side, gave one televised interview. He didn't shout, he didn't cry. He simply told his father's story with the quiet precision of a scholar. It was devastating. Social media erupted with the hashtag Justice for Taylor Choi. The public pressure became a tangible force. 4 days after the courtyard standoff, Elise received a formal letter from Kang and Park Holdings. It was not from Min Jun, it was from the board of directors. They proposed a private settlement. The terms were starkly different from Madame Kang's whispered offer. Min Jun would immediately pay all back rent and penalties. The restaurant partnership would be dissolved. Elise would buy out Min Jun's 78.5% share at a fair market value to be paid over 5 years. In effect, she would own 100% of the restaurant, Elise, outright. The building, of course, was already hers. Furthermore, the Kang family would issue a public statement acknowledging the historical disputes over the land and making a substantial donation to a fund for small business owners in Choi Di-hyun's name. In return, Elise and Professor Choi would sign a non-disparagement agreement. They would not pursue any legal action regarding the historic land seizure, and they would not physically excavate the courtyard. The box would remain buried, but its existence would now be part of the public record, a permanent footnote to the Kang family's legacy. It was a clean, brutal business transaction. They were trading money and property for silence and the cessation of a PR nightmare. Elise and Professor Choi met in her restaurant to discuss it. The suspension on her menu had been mysteriously lifted the day before. "They're offering you everything you fought for," he said, stirring a cup of tea. "Your business, your freedom, and they are offering me a memorial for my father, not the truth, but a memorial." "Is it enough?" Elise asked. He looked out the window at the courtyard. "The truth is already out. The world knows what they did. Digging up the box would only provide courtroom evidence, which we might still lose. This way, my father's name is cleared in the history books, and you get to keep your life's work. It is a pragmatic peace." Elise signed, Professor Choi signed. The Kang family transferred the funds. The news broke. Chef Elise Thorne gains full ownership in settlement with Kang family. The article mentioned the Choi family donation. It was reported as a business resolution. The gritty details of the feud smoothed over. Madame Kang retreated from public life entirely. Min Jun was quietly sidelined within the family company, his judgment questioned. For Elise, the silence after the storm was profound. She owned her restaurant, free and clear, her building, her kitchen. The inspectors stopped coming. The reservations flooded back, now fueled by a new narrative, the chef who stood up to a giant. But the victory felt hollow in the quiet moments. Her kitchen staff was new, the old team scattered. Jae-hoon called once to apologize. She told him there was nothing to apologize for. Survival looks different to everyone. She rebuilt. She hired a new, diverse team. She changed the restaurant's name from Elise to Thorn and Soil, reclaiming her pop-up spirit. The menu was a triumphant reclamation: kimchi cornbread, sea urchin grits, doenjang soufflé. It was packed every night. Weeks later, a sealed envelope was delivered by hand to the restaurant. Inside was a single key and a note on expensive stationery. The note read, "The east wall of the courtyard, the loose stone, a copy for you." It was Madame Kang's initials. Elise went to the courtyard at night. She found the stone, third from the corner. It wiggled. She pried it up. Beneath it was a small, waterproof safe buried in the dirt, not the tailor's metal box, a new one. Inside the safe was a stack of documents, photocopies of the original fraudulent zoning petitions with Park family signatures, copies of bank records showing bribes, a handwritten confession from the city official who had been pressured, detailing the whole scheme. It was the evidence from the box, the real evidence. Madame Kang had it. She must have had it unearthed secretly years ago when the lawyer's son retired to ensure it was never found. And now she had given a copy to Elise. It was not an act of repentance. It was an act of cold strategy. By giving Elise the evidence, she made Elise complicit in the silence. Elise now possessed the proof that could truly destroy the Kang family, but if she ever used it, she would violate the settlement and lose everything she had just won. It was a leash, a very long, very elegant leash. Elise held the papers, her hands trembling. She could burn them, she could lock them away, she could use them. The power and the burden were now hers alone. She chose a third path. She invited Professor Choi back to the restaurant. She showed him the documents without a word. He read them, his face impassive. When he finished, he looked at her. "What will you do?" "I'm giving them to you," Elise said. "They belong to your family. You decide. Keep them, destroy them, use them. I will support whatever you choose, but I won't hold them for you." Professor Choi took the papers. He held them as if they were his father's bones. "Thank you," he whispered. He did not take them to the press. He did not file a lawsuit. He placed them in a safety deposit box. He told Elise that some truths are more powerful as a secret held by the wronged, a sword that never needs to be drawn but forever changes the balance of power. Life moved on. One Tuesday evening during service, Min Jun Kang walked into Thorn and Soil. He came alone. He sat at the chef's counter and ordered the tasting menu. Elise saw him from the pass, her heart hammered. She cooked his meal herself, every course. He ate slowly, deliberately. After the last dish, he asked to speak to her. She came out, wiping her hands on a towel. "The food is exceptional," he said. He looked tired, older. It always was. "Why are you here, Min Jun?" "A debt," he said. "Not the financial one, that's settled, a different one." He took a deep breath. "I knew about the box, not the details, but I knew my family's shame was buried under this land. I thought if I put a brilliant temporary tenant here, someone like you who would leave eventually, I could have the prestige of the location without the risk of ownership. I used you as a shield. That was cowardly. And my mother, her cruelty to you was about protecting that secret. I am sorry." Elise studied him. The apology felt real and also useless. "Thank you for saying it. I am not asking for forgiveness." "Good." He nodded, accepting that. He stood to leave, then paused. "She's ill, you know, my mother. The stress, the doctors say it's her heart. She won't see anyone. She just sits in her garden." He didn't say it to garner sympathy. He said it as a fact, a piece of the aftermath. Then he left. Elise stood in her bustling restaurant, the smell of her food in the air, the deed to the building in her office, the copy of the key to the safe in her pocket. She had won. She had her place. But the cost was etched into the silence of the people who had left and in the weary eyes of the man who had just apologized. The final surprise came 6 months later. Elise was approached by a documentary film crew. They wanted to tell the story of Thorn and Soil, a story of food and resilience. During the interview, the producer, a sharp-eyed woman, asked an unexpected question. "We've heard rumors about a historical land dispute under this building, that there's evidence buried here. Is there any truth to that?" Elise smiled, the serene, unbothered smile she had practiced in the mirror for years. "This building has many stories in its foundation," she said. "I'm just here to cook. The past is for historians. I'm a chef. I deal in the present." The answer was perfect, evasive yet profound. It would make for great television. After the crew left, Elise went to the courtyard. It was empty. She knelt by the now solid flagstone, the one that had never been loosened again. She placed her palm on the cool surface. She thought of the tailor, of his son, of her grandmother, of the long, invisible lines of struggle that connected them all across oceans and decades. She had come to Seoul with a duffel bag of knives. She had become a chef, a businesswoman, a landlord, a pawn, a player, and finally, a keeper of secrets. She had used her strong hands to hold herself up, and in doing so, had held up the truth for someone else. Inside, the restaurant was full. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses spilled out into the night. Her food was on every plate. Her name was on the building. The shock on Madame Kang's face was now a memory, a frozen moment of a world inverting. Elise stood, brushed off her knees, and walked back to her kitchen. The dinner service was waiting. The next course needed to be plated. Her work, was just beginning. So what is the true price of a seat at the table? For Elise Thorne, it was measured in more than money. It was counted in lost allies, in buried evidence, in the weight of a secret she now carries for someone else. She got her building, she got her restaurant, she got her name in lights, but the victory carved hollows where there was once only hunger. The Kang family's world corrected itself around the shock, absorbing the scandal, writing a check, and moving on. The system, as Madame Kang said, remained. Elise simply bought her way to a higher tier within it. This story was never a fairy tale. It was a transaction, a negotiation of power where the currency was shame, silence, and real estate. The tailor's truth was traded for a chef's sovereignty. One family's history was exchanged for another woman's future. And the building stands, as it always has, on ground stained by a tragedy that no donation can wash away. The most powerful truths are often the ones we agree to leave buried, because unearthing them would cost the winners too much. Elise's story forces an uncomfortable question: is it better to topple the giant, or to force the giant to pay for your own castle? There is no clean, heroic answer. Sometimes, changing the world means securing your own small, defiant corner of it first. Sometimes, justice is not a verdict, but a shift in the balance, a secret acknowledged, a debt paid, a narrative forever altered. Elise did not break the system. She learned its hidden language, and she spoke it fluently enough to claim a permanent address. The shock on Madame Kang's face that night was the sound of an old story cracking. It was the moment a woman in a chef's uniform stopped playing her assigned role and rewrote the script. She reminded everyone that the person serving your food might own the room, that the help might hold the deed, that history is not a dead thing in the ground, but a live wire waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to touch it. We live in a world of layered stories, of facades and foundations. The next time you walk into a beautiful space, consider what and who might be buried beneath it. Consider the invisible hands that built it, the forgotten names it erased, and the quiet battles fought for every square foot. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears an apron. Sometimes it's in the calm, unbothered expression of a woman who knows exactly what she owns. If you found yourself captivated by this story of hidden power and seismic status shocks, you're in the right place. We dedicate ourselves to unearthing the incredible narratives that lie beneath the surface of our world. For more documentaries that challenge what you think you know, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story is already waiting.